Welcome back, everyone. So let's actually start moving this CardList section of our code into this CardList folder. So let's talk about the file. What we need to make is we need to make a component file. So here I'm going to say cardlist.component.jsx. Now, depending on your project, or depending on the files you look at when you are out there reading other React projects, you may see that this file is called instead index.js inside of a CardList folder. You may also just see cardlist.jsx. All of these are valid ways of naming a file. It's just how you decide to do it for your project or how your senior architect decides to do it for your project so that it's easy to navigate. Personally, I like cardlist.component because it's very clear to me when I'm searching through files using the global search function what I'm looking for. I can just say I want the card list and I know it's a component. Now you might be wondering, well, isn't it inside of the component folder? As long as you find the card list file inside of the component folder, isn't that going to be the file? The problem with this is that there may be numerous files inside of the card list that are all related to the component. This might include styling files, this might include test files, this might include a plethora of other things. Again, depending on how you architect your application's folder structure. For me personally, this is the way that I prefer to do it, and it's really easy for me to search, and this is what I prefer. So this is my justification for why I name my files this way. I picked this up when I was coding on Angular projects. Angular has this type of naming convention, and I thought this was a really great way of navigating through files, and I've just kept it and moved it into my React projects. So here, inside of our card list component file, what we need to do is we need to bring in the relevant component, which is, again, our class component that we get from React. So we're still writing our class components, even for our card list component. You might be wondering, well, Yihua, what about functional components? We'll learn about functional components and how to convert this whole Monsters Rolodex application over to functional components once we finish with our class components. Right now, I still think class components is the best way to really learn about them to begin with because you will see them in projects. And also, it's easier to understand how React does rendering and the concept of rendering overall. Class components to me are just the most clear, again, because of those lifecycle methods. So here, what we want to do is we want to initialize this card list component as we did with our app. And as we saw, we want to extend our component. And then once we have this, what we want to do now is just render something, just so that we can make sure that our component is working. So what I'm going to return is a div. And inside of this div, I want it to say, hello, I'm the card list component. So let's just save this. And what we need to do is we need to export this. So I want to default export this. And what exporting does is it allows other files to import the code that you write inside of it outside. So this way, what I'm saying is that, hey, I've got this class card list and I want you to export it by default. Meaning that if they don't try to destructure from the file in order to access other things, by default, give them whatever this is, which is our card list class component. So then what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into app.js, and I'm going to import it like so. So I'm going to import card list from, I'm going to go up to the components file, into the card list folder, into the card list component file. And now we have access to this component. And as I mentioned, we can use these components the same way that we use any other of these components. Input, divs, they're all components. Except now we have card list. So one quick thing to note, all of the components that you write, unlike these other components that React has given us that resemble the HTML tags, ours must always be capitalized as the first letter. So it's camel case in the sense that every subsequent word needs to also be capitalized, but the very first letter also needs to be capitalized. This is how React can see, oh, this is a component that is made by the actual developer. So now that we have our card list, let's just save and see what we see. So inside we see, this is our component. Hello, I'm the card list component. So we know our card list is working and it's rendering onto the page. Now, before we proceed any further, I want to highlight one thing about components. Inside of our component so far, we have returned one element. And what I mean by one element is the sense that even though our components might have a lot of HTML inside of them, this component is just one div. But you can imagine that if inside of this div, we had perhaps an H1, and maybe as a sibling to this H1, we had another div. Let me just structure this so it's more clear. And maybe inside of this div, we have a p tag that has some text. And then maybe beside this, we have some other components. This is all perfectly valid. But the thing to remember is that technically this is all encapsulated in one parental component or parental HTML tag. This is an important thing to remember because all components must be just the one component or the one parent level holder HTML tag. If you have siblings, this is actually going to give you an error. You'll see that here, all this is highlighted. Now I turned off highlighting because it gets annoying when I'm teaching and you see all of the different text fly up. But this is a very important thing to note. You cannot have multiple different components at the same level returned from a component. You must have one parent level component. Now there are some ways around this, which I'll show you in a later lesson when we talk about more, I guess, complicated ways of rendering different components. But for now, this is a very good rule of thumb, is that when you return a component, make sure that there's only one top level component that you're returning. So now, again, we understand that our card list component is rendering. We've put it into its own file. What we need to do now is get the monsters that we had before into this component. And we're going to do that using props, which is going to be a new topic with our components. And that's what we'll cover in the next lesson.